Beautiful. So we're going to talk about the midsection first before we get into some movement. And to make introductions, my name is Rocky Snyder. I've got a training facility here in Santa Cruz, California. And we got a lot of people asking us that when they come in, if I could really work on my midsection as well as some other areas, what are the best exercises I could do? Or how do I, better yet, how do I get that ripped six pack? And not to be too sarcastic, but everyone has that ripped six pack. It's there. It may just be hidden under some layers of, we'll call it emotional protection or extra energy that's stored up. You know, it's just, in order for you to see it, you've got to change a few things. And most of the time we're talking diet, and that's where people roll their eyes or they tell me they've got a very healthy diet. And I'm sure it probably is healthy. It just may be too much of it. And your body is just saying, I only need so much. Let's store the rest for a cold winter or something of that nature. So in terms of definition, defining the abdominals, you really have to lean down your body. And we're not going to talk about that today. I would say go get yourself a registered dietitian or licensed or certified nutritionist and really start to home in on proper portion control, proper food selection, proper time of day to eat, and all of that. Because 80% of getting you to a slimmer body is nutrition. I would say only 20% is actually exercise and movement. So what we're talking about is, how do I get these muscles to do what they're supposed to do? And in our conventional way of strengthening the body, for the most part, we're only hitting a small fraction of what this area is meant to do in regards to what it was designed for. So let's talk about that first. Everyone thinks about their abdominals. The abdominals connect the ribs to the front of the pelvic bone, or the pelvis, called the pubic bone, or the pubic symphysis. And the muscles themselves, they are in bunches separated by ligaments or connective tissue. And we've got two sides to it. They're fairly symmetrical, not exactly. The larger muscles of the abdominal wall are up here, and they get smaller as they feed down in a triangular fashion to the front of your pubis. Now, they're not attached to your legs. So anytime you're moving your legs off the ground or anything else, you're not moving those legs with your tummy muscles. You're moving them with other muscles. But you will feel a lot of pressure and tension in this area because it's trying to keep everything from falling apart, to put it simply. If they're connecting your ribs to your pelvis, then when the abdominals move, they should move either the ribs or the pelvis or both of them at the same time. And when the muscles shorten, they will pull the front of the ribs and the front of the pelvis toward each other. When the muscles lengthen, they will allow the ribs and the pelvis to move away from each other. But they also connect on the side of the ribs over here and the side of the ribs over here. So when one side shortens, it may pull that side of the ribs into the pelvis, or maybe draw the pelvis up toward the ribs, and vice versa. So now the muscles of the abdominals, one side may choose to shorten while the other side has a tendency to lengthen. And the same could occur when we have rotation, where when I turn my ribs and my hips are staying in the seated position, my abdominals are actually going to shorten in a certain way. And then when I rotate the other direction, they're going to shorten in the opposite way, while other muscles in the abdominals will lengthen. So we're really talking about positioning and movement. But a lot of the times we are dealing with preventing movement in the form of like planks. So there's this huge push with planks over the last decade or so, where everyone's doing planks to improve their abdominal strength, which is great. And yes, it will help. But remember, your abs are not connected to your legs. So you're involving other muscles, which is good too, because we are one integrated kind of whole body. And we don't necessarily just isolate one area when we move, but we move through the entire framework that makes us up. But the abdominals are not alone here. They've got these other muscles that wrap around the waist and connect the ribs to the pelvis also. And on the back side, it goes around where the waistband is on the back of the pelvis and connects the back of the ribs. And those muscles come in, and here you go. They actually attach to the spine or at least the tendinous tissue that connects the spine to those muscles. So here is our oblique muscles. Some of them will go more vertically, and some of them will go in a diagonal fashion. So when certain ones shorten or lengthen, we will see side bending. And when certain ones shorten in a diagonal fashion or lengthen, we'll see rotation. So it's not just the abdominals that are helping out, but those muscles that wrap around. And there's another muscle or two and so on, but there's actually several muscles. So we're not going to pick apart muscles and try and isolate and work them, because I think the fitness industry has done a remarkable job on that. We'll explore it a little bit while lying down on the floor, but we'll also explore, how do I work my midsection when I'm on all fours, or when I'm on one knee, or on both knees, or when I'm standing? Because in truth, these muscles are always helping to manage the mass of our bodies, and always managing the position of the ribs over the pelvis and vice versa. But when we go and think about, how do I work my abdominals, you typically think of somebody laying down and doing a crunch or a sit-up, or they're laying on their side, which we'll review, but that's just one part of the whole equation. So we're just going to jump right into exploring movement today as it relates to the midsection. If you're thinking this is going to be some type of group exercise workout, and I'm going to get the music started pretty soon, and we're going to start you sweating and all of that, there may be perspiration, but my goal is to explore movement, not to necessarily give you this kind of, oh, this killed me, that was the most amazing workout. I want to give you components that you could take into your routine and start to implement them in there. And it's not out of the question that people with lower back issues have been recommended to start to train these muscles. Even though most of them don't attach to the spine, they do help position the ribs above the pelvis, and that connecting bony structure, of course, is the spine. So if this area is pulling more or shortening here, and this one's lengthening out, and I suddenly find my posture more over one side than the other, imagine what my lower back is experiencing. So if I were to create a more balance of strength and tension and length throughout these muscles, it may very well help to release and relieve a lot of low back issues. Okay, we're gonna also talk about the function of these muscles. For instance, I'm gonna kneel just to stay in the frame, but if you wanted to stand and experience this, what I want to explain is that muscles actually help to slow us down and then redirect our energy somewhere else. So for instance, if you were laying on your back and you did an abdominal crunch, you know that when your muscles shorten, they can lift the rib cage toward the pelvis by lifting the head and shoulders off the ground. But when I'm standing here and I do that same motion, letting my rib cage go toward my pelvis and my spine flexes, why are my abdominals relaxed? If I'm laying down, that should be the muscular action. Like, we're training ourselves on our backs to do all these crunches, but here I am in this kind of crunched standing position, and this is relaxed. Meanwhile, though, my lower back muscles and those obliques on the backside and some other muscles attaching the ribs to the pelvis, one muscle in particular called the quadratus lumborum, or the QL for short, those muscles are contracting, but they're contracting by lengthening, almost like I'm helping somebody lower over a cliff, and they have that rope and they're holding on, and I am letting them down. I am contracting and lengthening that rope out. That's really what's happening on the muscles on the backside. As I lean forward, it turns my backside on. And the opposite would occur if I were to lean back and extend my spine. My abdominals are kicking in big time. So then you got to scratch your head and go, well, what are my abdominals supposed to do? Are they a spine flexor or are they a spine extensor? Well, they control extension, and then in this lengthened position, they shorten to pull me back to a balanced state. Once I go past this state, now it's my lower back that's contracting, and to shorten, they pull me back to a balanced state here. So the lower back and the abdominals are constantly going back and forth between each other, extending or lengthening and shortening, just like the obliques on this side and that side. They're constantly helping me maintain balance with these minute contractions back and forth. All right, so we can accelerate like a baseball pitcher, winding up and decelerating that arm behind me engaging these muscles. And then as soon as that ball comes forward, those muscles are shortening and accelerating. But then the backside is slowing everything down after the ball is released. So the arm doesn't go flying to home base either. It just stays on me. So all those muscles are slowing me down this way. So there's this constant interplay. And that's what I want to kind of get across is we're going to accelerate in one direction and cause a deceleration at the same time so that we stay in one piece, basically. And then there's the side that we've been training so far, which is all about stiffness and holding and bracing. When you're lifting heavy weights, of course, you don't want yourself flopping all around and moving. If I have weights on my shoulders, I want to be strong and secure and really stiff through my core, so to speak, through my corset. However, when you reach into the refrigerator or into your dryer, you are not staying stiff. You are dynamically stabilizing your body to pick up a load and bring it back in. And if we think about the spine is not one straight bone. We're all segmented all the way up to the top. So we should be strong here as equally as strong here, 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 and so on. So when it comes to the planks, again, it's just one side of the equation. Holding and isometric contractions can be good, but we also need to be strong through a dynamic range. Okay, floor positions. When working on the midsection, by laying on the floor, we're going to really focus on only this area. So from a muscular standpoint, it's going to be very high in terms of intensity because I don't have my arms or my legs or anywhere else in my body helping me out. And as I get up to like a kneeling position or on all fours or standing, I'm still going to be working this, but it's going to have the help of friends, like the muscles around my hips or my arm or my upper torso. So muscularly, laying down on the ground and doing all these types of movements is much more isolated in activating those muscles in a heightened state of intensity, which is good. But I also want to have them understand that they need to communicate with all the other parts of my body. Doing only isolated exercises will make me good at isolating that area, but transferring force from that area out my arms or out my legs, well, that's a whole different subject. So lying down, I can be in a supine position, meaning face up, and I can go through my traditional kind of motions of crunching. That's flexing my spine and then rolling back. We come out of flexion, so you could say I'm learning to extend, but I only extend as far as the floor is going to allow me. So the muscles in my abdominals in a floor crunch are only going from here to here, but not out here. So a floor crunch is great to some degree. It's a good movement. By all means, it's a great movement, but it's only giving you a little bit of what the abdominals can do. Now, not only can I flex and extend my spine like we talked about, but I can side bend. So if I'm on my back, I could practice side bending while keeping my shoulders off the ground. And if you've ever taken any kind of cardio ab blasting class, this is probably one of those movements where you go side to side. So those are good in a lying down position. But also we spoke about the fact that when I rotate my rib cage on top of my hips, that's when those muscles can come into effect. So I could very well just simply rotate off the ground to one side and to the other, but I could keep my torso on the ground and rotate my pelvis to one side to the other to also affect the midsection. If I were to lift my legs off the ground, now there's a lot more mass for me to manage, and my pelvis has a lot more weight to it, and so that's more intense. And if I wanted to extend that mass out away from my body, that's going to make it even more intense. And if I wanted to rotate my rib cage in the opposite direction that my hips are rotating, that's going to be even more intense. Just like that side bend, I could just side bend my torso, but I could try and side bend my pelvis, or I could try and get them to move toward each other and away from each other. So you can see, I'm not talking about the muscles so much as I'm talking about the movement. Can we get the rib cage to move toward the pelvis in a way? Can we get the pelvis to move toward the ribs in a way? Can you get them to move together at the same time and away at the same time? Can they side bend at the top? Can they side bend at the bottom? Can they side bend in conjunction with each other? Can the torso rotate? Can the pelvis rotate? Can I get them to rotate in opposite directions? So by having one element move, that's pretty intense. By having the other element move, that may actually be even more intense and require more coordination. And it may be a novel movement, which the brain really loves novelty. And then by getting both of them to move back and forth with one another, boy, now you've just really sent the intensity level up a lot higher. So we're not going to think about abdominals and obliques and quadratus lumborum and the erectors and all the other muscles that surround your corset. We're going to think of how does my rib cage move in conjunction with my pelvis. And once we do that, we're going to experience spinal flexion, extension, lateral flexion, and rotation. All the movements the spine is responsible for. And as we move these bony segments around, the muscles are going to have to kick in because they're connected to the bones. So that's how we think of movement here. Not that I'm going to work my rectus abdominis, I'm going to work my psoas, I'm going to work my obliques. Let's just explore the movement. So you did that face up, but we can also be on our side. So I can be in this side position, laying down. I can try and lift my rib cage off the ground. I can try and lift my pelvis off the ground. I can try and do both, which is extremely difficult. But then we've got this propped up position where I can be on my side and I can side shift my hips, which in effect makes me lean into my rib cage. So I'm working on the underside. I can be in this position and move my hips forward and backwards. So now I'm maintaining a certain position while I'm trying to flex and extend into my spine. And I can create rotation by reaching under or up. So here's 3 planes of motion, 3 dimensions of space in which we live in. Moving forward and backwards, side to side, and rotating left and right. Can I place myself in an environment, whether it's side lying, face up, or face down, or standing, where I can start to explore these 3-dimensional spaces? So if I was in a plank position, first of all, I guess we should talk about the progressions being in this quadruped position. The easiest, most manageable one would be on my elbows and my knees. To make it a little bit more demanding, I just add more body segments. So I could be on my hands and my knees. But I could also be on my toes. So I could be on my elbows and my toes. And then ultimately, probably the most advanced one is to be on my hands and toes. Now, while in this position, I can work on extending my spine and flexing my spine. We can see that in the mad cat stretch, but also can I do it with my knees off the ground? So now that's a bit more intense. Can I do it with my legs straighter? And now we're talking about yoga and upward dog and downward dog for the most part. I could be in this position and I can work on a side-to-side action where I can simply just feel what it's like to walk my feet off to one side and off to the other side. I can also work on hands walking over to one side and then the other. Or I could try and get both of them to move in the same direction at the same time for the ultimate amount of lateral flexion or side bend. But what if I wanted to be in that plank position and start working rotation? Well, what part of my body do I want to rotate? I could simply take one hand off the ground and rotate underneath me or above me. I could take one leg and reach underneath me or above me and behind me. I could keep all 4 points on the ground and rotate the pelvis. Heck, I could even just turn my head and create rotation that way. All the while really affecting that midsection. So there's some ways in which we could just, by using the body and its body weight, start to explore moving in these positions to really affect these muscles. But we've got these tools too. You know, we've got ab wheels and other devices that, in essence, We call them an ab wheel, but this is like a lat wheel, the muscles on the back side here that connect your arm to your lower back and the rib cage and your pelvis. So that if I were to go back and forth like this, remembering that my abdominals do not connect to my arms or legs. And why is this called an ab wheel? Well, of course, because I'm becoming a suspension bridge like the Golden Gate, but the suspension wires are here. And as long as I can maintain a fairly straight spine, then those muscles underneath me, connecting my ribs to my pelvis, are contracting and preventing this from occurring. Now, the muscles that are really doing a lot of the work, aside from the lats in the ab wheel, are your hip flexor muscles that attach your thighs to the discs of your lower back. So would it be out of the question for somebody to do this and feel this in their lower back? Not at all, because it is a hip flexor strengthening exercise. It's one of the major muscles responsible for allowing the hips to go out and return again, just like the lats are responsible for allowing the arms to go out and return again. So the ab wheel is really a lat and hip flexor wheel. The abs are just maintaining a good, strong isometric condition or contraction to prevent bad things from happening to the back. And that's kind of like the plank itself. Any kind of movement with the prone plank is trying to keep the abdominals in a fairly isometric condition as if you're just simply staying in one place. And we also have gliders, right? We've got those furniture movers that you can pick up at any kind of sporting goods store or Bed Bath & Beyond. And those gliders can be under the feet. And so now I'm in a plank position and I'm allowing my hips to rotate, to lift, to turn. So my abdominals are actually starting to dynamically move in that fashion. But we can also do the same thing by allowing the arms to move back and forth. And in fact, the ones that I get come in a set of 4. So I could put them underneath my feet and underneath my hands, and I can start this crawling action. Well, that's a lot more intense. So there's a whole bunch of ways that we can start to support ourselves in that bridge-like position and either keep the spine from moving or encourage it to move. And both of those are fabulous ways of encouraging better strength and coordination through here, because we need to be stiff, but we need to be pliable. And all of these movements are going to give you a little bit of all of that. All right, so then we've been doing everything basically lying down, face up, face down, on your side. We got up to a quadruped position. And this is kind of a progression that we could use, kind of thinking like when we were infants, we went from laying down to rolling over to crawling all around. We can use that in the way of thinking about what should I go next? What's the next motor skill development pattern that I should have? And that would be kneeling. And so with kneeling, I could be very well on both knees, which is going to pretty much keep my pelvis from doing a lot of motion. I could also free it up a little bit more by having one foot forward, which we call a half kneeling position. And remembering that targeting these muscles, we're going to be looking for flexion and extension through the spine, lateral flexion from side to side, and rotation. And they could occur at the same time. For instance, I could be laterally flexed and practice some rotational motion here, or laterally flexed and working back and forth. I don't have to be exclusively in one plane of motion versus another. But how do I do that with just the weight of my upper body? Well, I could take dumbbells and I could reach outward in different directions, reaching forward, overhead, to one side, to the other, rotating back and forth. And the weight that I add to my arms may feed a good deal of resistance and action down into my midsection. And if I'm going to be on one knee, I definitely want to explore what life is like on the other knee. And there's going to be one side that's a bit more friendly, a bit more stable, maybe a little bit better coordinated or stronger. And it's great that you do it on that side, but I might want to improve the side that's a little bit lesser. And so I might do an additional set of movements on the side that I'm more compromised on. Now behind me, I've got all these rubber bands here, and I've got a cable system that I could use. But with these bands, the nice thing is they're known as variable resistance, meaning that the closer this band gets toward the anchor point, the easier and the less resistance. And the further out it gets, it increases, compared to a dumbbell where the weight is always the same. So the rubber band is quite nice. I could get myself into that half kneeling position, and I could begin by just seeing if can I maintain a stiffness in my body by just exploring different areas to reach with this band. And of course, the band is trying to pull me back and over to my side. And the further out my arms go, the more intense that feeling's going to be. So I can just maintain this good, strong, straight posture and have those muscles be fed information and force in anywhere I reach. In fact, maybe going around a clock face, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3, 4, 5, wherever you want to go, but maintaining that nice tall posture. The isometric contraction around that corset is going to really light up. And I could face the opposite direction. So what is it like for force to be fed off from my right side? I could switch legs and have the other leg be forward. Whoa. And you're going to find there's some places where you need to wake up. You need to get it so that it's solid. For instance, I just reached upward and I felt myself going over. There's a direction that I want to feed more information, more stimuli into. So I'm just going to maybe do a few more like that so that my body has to figure out what it has to do between the hips and the arms and all the muscles in between. Now, keeping my torso still and reaching out against resistance is all about stiffness in this area. But remember, we need to move too. So I could take that band and I could encourage more of a side bend. So keeping my arms overhead perhaps, and just leaning off to one side and leaning to the other side and feeling how my ribs side bend left and right. I could also have it out in front of me and start to feed into the rotation. By having one leg forward, it keeps the hips from really rotating. If they do start to rotate, my knee is going to go outward. So it gives me an understanding that if I keep my knee straight ahead, most likely I'm not going to get a lot of pelvic rotation. It'll be much more into the upper body. So a whole bunch of ways to feed in this kneeling position. Then I can go up into a standing posture. Now I'm going to have the help of my legs. The biggest muscles of my body are going to be participating a lot more now. And I can do the same movements, but knowing if I have a wide stance, I'm really stable. There's not going to be a lot of demand up here compared to getting my feet closer and closer and closer. So a very close stance here is going to feed a lot more excitement and resistance and work into the midsection. I can also have a split stance where one leg is in front of the other, just like the half kneeling position we're just in. And ultimately, I could get onto one leg and see, can I do these movements with the bands while I'm balancing on one leg? In order to keep my pelvis in its proper balanced position, standing on one leg, the inner thigh, the midsection, and the gluteal muscles of my hips must engage to keep me here. Otherwise, I drop out of position. So single leg action, pressing forward. I can work on flexion and extension. I can press with bands behind me and do kind of a standing bench press or band press. I can do a pulling action with the bands in front of me where I'm feeding flexion and extension. I can have the bands overhead and do a side bending action, or with one arm driving it up and over to the other side. I can also work on rotation. And this is all my upper body moving. But what if we just changed that up and gave you something else to think about? if I kept my upper body still, could I turn my pelvis? That's much different. And then, of course, can I get them both doing it at the same time? So as I pull to my right, can I step left? As it comes back, can I step left to the right? Here, 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 here. And suddenly we start firing up all those muscles throughout the midsection. So my hope in doing this kind of midsection makeover is not to make over the muscles, but to make over the mindset and the understanding of how our body moves. We can continue to do all different variations of crunches and sit-ups, bicycles and leg lifts and all those things. They can be very good depending upon the person. But how do you use your midsection when you get out of the car, when you play with the kids, when you go and do your favorite activity, or you go for a long hike with a backpack on you? This is what I'm more interested in. And if we start to feed all these movements in, and you watch your portion sizes, then these actions will actually start to show, not only in how you move, but perhaps a little bit more definition if that's what you're going for. So to recap, we can do movements on the floor, face up, face down, and really isolate those areas by allowing the rib cage to move in different directions, or the pelvis, or a combination of both. But the muscles themselves, when they lengthen, they slow us down from falling, and then they contract and shorten. In fact, that's how muscles work when we move through space. They must lengthen and load like a rubber band before they shorten and contract. So to only do crunches and teach the body how to shorten, shorten, shorten without opening up and getting that elastic principle and property of slinging those forces all around, you're going to be missing quite a bit. And chances are there's going to be some little aches and pains that occur with it because the muscles aren't going through their full range of motion. We also got up into a half kneeling or quadruped position, and there's different progressions. And then in the standing position, there's a whole bunch of movements that we can do. I chose the rubber bands right now, but a cable system, dumbbells, just your own body weight, any type of movements like this. That's why yoga is fantastic. All the warrior poses, the triangle poses, going through those in a flowing action can really stimulate these muscles too, and not simply holding a pose and having it be just simply static, but a blend of static and dynamic actions.